Oftentimes when we talk about trade deals or big bills, we talk about what's in them, but we don't actually talk about how it affects us, everyday Americans. So when breaking down Trump's trade deal with the EU, we are going to talk about how it directly affects you and me, and then I'm going to talk about my opinion on all of it at the end. So this deal was finalized on the 27th. Here is a video of Trump announcing it.
So I just want to congratulate you. I think it's great that we made a deal today instead of playing games and maybe not making a deal at all. I think it's, I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much.
Thank
Congratulations.
You very much. Yeah, thank you. We have a deal. We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world.
So she's right that the EU and the US are the largest economies in the world, and a lot of people don't know this, but this is the largest trade agreement in the history of the world. Not even close. These two, our countries have a ton of trade between us. For context, 5% of the imports that we get are from the EU, and then 13.7% of the imports that the EU gets are from us, the United States. Before this deal went into place, it was about a 1% to 2% tariff rate on the EU from the United States. Now with this deal, and this is the largest part of the deal, that number is going up to 15%. There was a lot of talk for a while that it was going to be 20%, 30%. Trump has settled on 15% on them, and then them to us is now at 0%, meaning that European companies will not have to spend any money. There will be no tax on them to buy goods from the United States. A few exceptions to this. Trump wants to protect the steel and aluminum industries in America. So those are at 50% rather than 15%. And then the only things that are at 0%, there's aircrafts, military materials, and then some other random raw goods that are exceptions to the 15% tariff. So those are all the tariffs. And I'm going to explain how they really impact you in a moment. But the other side of this agreement, and I think this is actually a bigger side, is that the European Union is promising to invest in the United States, which is undeniably a massive win. Trump was able to get a $750 billion investment promise in U.S. energy. And then Trump was also able to get a $600 billion investment promise in U.S., mostly in the U.S. military, and then some other kind of random industries thrown in there. So that's it. That is the whole trade deal. It's actually not very complicated, which is actually a very good thing in my mind. But it does have massive consequences for you and I. So I want to break all of those down, how they directly affect us. The 15% tariff is a tax on American businesses. Those businesses will pass that tax on to the consumer. So you can expect around a 15% uptick in the following things, since this is what we get from Europe. We don't get everything from Europe, but there's kind of three main things that we get from Europe that are going to go up. The biggest is cars, mostly German cars, Volkswagens. Those are going to go up. The other is pharmaceuticals. And then there's a lot of machine parts that we get from Europe as well, which is going to make building factories more expensive. Undeniably, those three things will get more expensive. There's no question. The tariffs also make alcohol and designer brands more expensive, like Louis Vuitton or wine from France or whatever. Obviously, way less important than cars and pharmaceuticals, but if that's what you're into, that's a factor. The investments, though, in the U.S. will impact us as well. And there's really no argument for how we'll get into the tariffs, on my opinion, in a second. But the investments in the U.S., there's really no argument for how it could be a bad thing. It is undeniably a great thing, fantastic deal done by Trump. The investment into the military is essentially going to allow us to sell off our old military things off to Europe, and then we can spend that money to invest and upgrade it, which is fantastic. Obviously, this leads to a safer nation. I think that does impact us directly. The other $750 billion investment in energy is, I think, the real win here. And this is massive. This is going to affect all of us. It's good for a few reasons. The first is that jobs in the energy industry are going to keep going up. So if you live in Pennsylvania, Texas, those places that are really doing a lot of fracking or coal mining, for example, that industry is going to be very well protected. Jobs are going to go up. And then, of course, gas should get really, really cheap, which is fantastic. The other thing that this means, this is on the foreign policy front, is that it's going to hurt Russia in their Ukraine conflict, obviously, because what's been going on for the last 4 years, which is ridiculous, is the EU and the US obviously wants to stop Russia from attacking Ukraine, but then the EU turns around and buys oil from them because Russia has a ton of natural gas. And it's stupid, and we all know it's stupid, but they need gas. And what we had Biden doing is stopping the fracking here and not being energy friendly. And so the EU had no confidence that they could come to the US and buy things. So instead they went to Russia. So not only is Trump going to make the energy industry thrive in the US, but he's actually hurting Russia at the same time and helping our allies, which is fantastic. Now, getting into my opinion on all of this, there's some good and there is some bad. In terms of investments from the EU to the US, there's no downside. It's all fantastic, as I said. In terms of the tariffs, though, I have been very critical of them because I'm a free market conservative. The economics on it is pretty clear. It is a tax on people. As just a general rule, I don't support taxing people. So there's some real downsides to it, but there are some upsides as well. On one hand, what Trump is trying to do here is actually pretty smart. He put a 15% tariff on the EU and got a 0% tariff on the US. And that essentially means that the EU will want to buy a ton of things from the US because there's no downside. They don't have to, EU businesses don't have to pay anything to get things from the US. And this is likely going to make the markets in the US very happy. The businesses will have more revenue to hire people because there's more people wanting to buy what they have. On the other hand, though, it means the EU does not have to pay anything to get our stuff, and American consumers have to pay 15% to get the EU stuff. So, essentially it might help out the worker or the businesses here, which is good, but it will definitely hurt the consumer. And this is my biggest problem with tariffs. When people talk about tariffs, they talk about the worker. The worker is certainly important, but the consumer, and they're the same person, obviously, the consumer also has to be taken into account. And tariffs always hurt the consumer every single time. So the real question is, can it help the worker enough to offset how much it's hurting the consumer? And I think that's where the real debate is. A real concern to me, obviously, is it's inflationary, right? The inflation right now hasn't even cooled from where it's been right now without the tariffs going into place yet, because these tariffs are going to be going into place in the next couple weeks. We're at a 2.7% inflation. And I know that sounds pretty good because we are dealing with 8% from Joe Biden, and it's certainly an improvement, but the Fed's target is 2%. And so that means inflation is more than 25% higher than it should be without, and again, this is without the tariffs. There will undeniably be higher inflation with the tariffs. Isaac Saul, he's a liberal journalist. He's created something called Tangle. He said it pretty well. I think this is the good debate, the upsides and the downsides, even though he is a liberal, in his newsletter. This is what he said. He said, "I'm personally skeptical that tariffs can drive revenues in the long term without hurting U.S. industry, shrinking our economy, and ultimately raising prices for consumers. But I was also skeptical Trump could secure a deal like this, one that aligned on his priorities and tilted what he's described as an imbalanced relationship with Europe greatly to our favor. His critics, at the least, have to eat some crow on the tactics, and many of my initial fears about the disorganized rollout of tariffs are receding. That said, for this deal to be as big or meaningful as Trump claims, revenues will have to continue to rise, inflation continue to ease, and Europe actually follow through on its commitments. And that will be the trade-off. I think that's very well said. Higher consumer prices for higher wages and lower employment, hopefully. If the higher wages and the low employment offset the higher consumer prices, then I think it's a win, but only time will tell. So just to understand this, if the job market is good and inflation is not at 2% yet, which that's kind of my prediction, I don't think that inflation is going to cool because of this. I just don't see any evidence for that. And if that happens, the Fed will not lower rates, and they shouldn't. And this is something Trump has talked a lot about. Obviously, Trump and MAGA really want the rates to go down, which I get it. It's good politically, but it's also good for Americans because they're able to take out debt in meaningful ways, like for a house. However, the only way to get inflation down is to have the rates high. And the only reason to lower the rates when inflation is high is to help the job market. That's the only way they would do that, because if they don't do that, they might get stagflation. However, if the job market looks good, there's no reason to raise the rates, or rather to lower the rates. There's no reason to do that. And the job market does look good, and it seems these tariffs might actually be helping in that department. And so because of that, what we might be seeing is, and again, if they did lower rates, make no mistake, we would see Joe Biden level inflation again. It would happen. And so it'd be a mistake for Donald Trump, that was the main issue, the number one issue when you polled Americans of why they didn't vote for Kamala Harris or why they disapproved of Joe Biden was inflation. So Donald Trump cannot afford to lower the rates and then have inflation go through the roof. That's not going to help anybody, especially not the Trump administration. So what we'd see is Joe Biden level inflation if we cut the rates, and nobody wants that. So another way that this deal could directly affect you is it may keep interest rates high for much longer than it was expected. And honestly, I think that is the only way it should be if tariffs are the new way that Donald Trump has decided we're taxing people. Handing someone your keys to your house, business, or heart even, better be sure it is someone that you can trust. With my partner, Gray Ledger, Mr. Ledger conducts trust evaluations for personal and professional contacts, contractors, caregivers, roommates, hires, and even romantic partners. They quietly confirm identity, background, behavioral patterns, and red flags before you commit, because regret is much more expensive than diligence. Gray Ledger, for when trust needs verification. Visit grayledger.carrd.co, or you can head to the link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this episode, everybody. Please like the video so other great patriots like yourselves will see it, and tune in every single weekday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show, or you can watch another video right here.